COVID-19, vaccines, masks, and the scientific uncertainty excuse. The US Centers for Disease Control is now putting out a report on an outbreak of COVID-19 in Barnstable County, Massachusetts. Let me read the relevant section here. Approximately 3/4, 74% of cases occurred in fully vaccinated persons, those who had completed a 2-dose course of the mRNA vaccine, Pfizer, BioNTech, or Moderna, or had received a single dose of Janssen, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, at least 14 days before exposure to COVID. What this appears to mean is that the coronaviruses, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the Delta variant, has mutated around the vaccines. That's not really surprising. A number of scientific experts have warned that this was likely to occur. And it is worth noting that RNA viruses, coronaviruses or RNA viruses, are known to mutate at a very high rate. So let me just read the relevant section of this article from 1999. There are many other articles to this effect. When rates of spontaneous mutation are expressed per genome replication, different broad groups of organisms display characteristic values, roughly 0.2 for retroelements, that's RNA-based viruses, and close to 0.0034 for DNA-based microbes, including both viruses and cellular organisms. So that's a much lower rate than the RNA ones, and roughly 0.01 for higher eukaryotes, which is a fancy way of saying cellular organisms, people, plants, etc. Riboviruses, RNA viruses exclusive of retroviruses, so that would include coronaviruses and influenza, tend to display very high mutation rates. And then they go on to say it's hard to actually measure it, but that's what's seen. So it's not really surprising that the viruses would mutate. In fact, that's one of the main excuses given for the disappointing performance, perhaps total failure of the flu vaccines. The argument is the influenza is mutating rapidly and keeps changing every year. This is no big surprise, in fact. However, listening to the CDC, listening to various public health authorities over the last several months, you might get the impression that it was pretty likely that the vaccines would work perfectly. There was no serious risk that the viruses would mutate around the vaccines, or that if they mutated around the vaccines, as has often happened with other vaccines, that this would result in being unable to achieve the much vaunted herd immunity. All of this wasn't really talked about very much. Probably still isn't being talked about too much. So now the CDC is flip-flopping on masks again and saying that people who are fully vaccinated, at least in many areas, should wear the masks indoors. 2 months ago, they had said the opposite. They had said, well, actually, the vaccines ought to work, and therefore you ought not to be able to wear the masks. Okay, seems reasonable to me and most of us. But now we flip-flop again. CDC and the government are defending this yet another flip-flop by invoking what I call the scientific uncertainty excuse. We have new information. Science is uncertain. Anyone who thinks you can trust what we say doesn't understand how science works. What's going on here? This is what I call the scientific uncertainty excuse, which I encountered in graduate school and can be rather difficult to respond to. Scientists, often seeking money and large programs like Operation Warp Speed, for example, will make very confident statements implying little or no uncertainty in what they're doing. They will give schedules, for example, that don't have any kind of ranges. They're just like, we're going to do this in 6 months. We're going to have this super vaccine in a year, way faster than ever before. Often these projects are presented like Operation Warp Speed as we have a new concept in how to do ludicrously expensive government programs cheaply, efficiently, and it's not going to follow up the way so many government programs do. Again, they make very confident statements. They either imply or directly claim minimal or no uncertainty. And critics during this period may be ridiculed because it's settled science. It's like the Earth is a sphere, about 8,000 miles in diameter, pretty much. And that's pretty solid. It's pretty unlikely that's not true. Some scientific knowledge is that certain. The error, that's being generous, or the deception is to claim implicitly or explicitly a level of certainty that is not at all warranted. Now, in science, there's the concept of uncertainty, and there's the concept of error bars or confidence levels. And in some cases, the errors aren't really understood, therefore we can't even give a very reliable error bar. What is that like? Well, if you hire someone to build an addition on your home and they say it's going to take 3 months, you're justified in being concerned if it takes them 3 months and a day, right? They went over the time they said. But maybe it's an uncertain process. They don't know what they're going to find when they dig up the ground to lay the foundation, for example. Other issues. They might say it'll take 3 to 6 months. That's giving a confidence range. That's giving an error bar. We don't know exactly. And if they get completed within that time range, as they originally said, we're fine. They warned us up front. If they go over the 6 months, problem. Okay, they were upfront and disclosed the uncertainty level. Scientific and engineering practice requires errors, and that these be quoted correctly. Or if it's not even possible to determine what the errors are, you need to explain that. You need to say, okay, they're just unknown unknowns, in the infamous phrase from Donald Rumsfeld. We just don't know. In fact, with respect to vaccines failing because the viruses mutate around it, that was very likely to occur and almost never mentioned in the past year or so. Everything implied, the vast majority of it, except maybe some fine print somewhere, that, oh yeah, of course, these are safe, they're effective, they're going to work, they're going to achieve herd immunity because implicitly, for example, and there are many reasons they might not work, implicitly, there's no risk or negligible risk that the virus will mutate around the vaccine, even though that happens all the time with influenza. So understand that this is a trick that has a long history in science. It has a long history in military contracting, which is often very scientific, military R&D projects. You implicitly or explicitly claim a level of certainty you simply don't have in order to sell your program, in order to raise money, in order to talk people into wearing masks, for example, or taking a vaccine. Then, when you're caught, when it goes awry, when the high uncertainty turns out to be true, and it's necessary to flip-flop or change or make the schedule slip by some ridiculous amount, then you say, oh, science is uncertain. There's an 80 to 90% failure rate. We didn't mention that before in scientific projects. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's new information. The trick is they're neglecting to tell you that they didn't warn you about that up front, that they didn't give you large error bars, large uncertainties in what they were proposing. They implied or explicitly claimed real certainty. Do not accept and do not fall for the scientific uncertainty excuse. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.